Welcome to Business Talk, a global podcast series where we bring you closer to some of the world's most distinguished scholars and their impactful ideas. I'm Deepak, your host from India. There are researchers who study the world from a distance, and then there are those who step into it, listen closely, and ask the questions that most of us have never thought to ask. Today's guest is firmly in that second category. We are truly honored to welcome Professor Yamini Narayanan to Business Talk. Professor Yamini Narayanan is an ARC Future Fellow and Deputy Director of Partnerships, Impact and Engagement at the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalisation at Deakin University, Australia. But her intellectual journey is anything but conventional. Her work weaves together animal, political, and environmental geography, multispecies ethnography, South Asian studies, animal labor, and the emerging field of animals and geopolitics, building a body of scholarship that challenges us to rethink who counts in our political and moral worlds. Her book, Mother Cow, Mother India, published by Stanford University Press, is a testament to that vision. It didn't just enter the academic conversation, it reshaped it. The book won the Mid-Career Researcher Book Prize 2024 from the Asian Studies Association of Australia, the President's Book Prize 2024 from the South Asian Studies Association of Australia, and was shortlisted in the non-fiction category for the Crossword Book Award 2024, one of India's most prestigious literary honors. These are not just accolades, they are signals that the question Professor Narayan is asking matter deeply across disciplines and across borders. And she's far from done asking them. Her current research takes us inside India's brick kilns spaces of grueling labor, but with a lens that most researchers would never apply: the animals working within them. It is an inquiry into poverty, development, and exploitation that refuses to leave non-human lives out of frame. Her ARC Future Fellowship project, Animals and Geopolitics in South Asian Borderlands, goes even further, exploring how animals shape, subvert, and are shaped by geopolitical forces of the South Asian region. It is the kind of work that makes you pause and ask, why hasn't someone always been asking this? Her scholarship is supported by three Australian Research Council grants, including the prestigious DECRA Fellowship. In 2019, Deakin University recognized her with the Vice Chancellor's Award for Mid-Career Research Excellence. She is the founding convener of the Deakin Critical Animal Studies Network and lifelong fellow of the Oxford Centre for Animal Ethics, a distinction extended only by nomination or invitation. She served as special issue editor of Urban Geography and associate editor of Environmental Humanities, and she mentors the next generation of researchers who share her passion for these vital intersections. Today, she joins us to share insights from Mother Cow, Mother India, a multi-species politics of dairy in India, a conversation about cows, politics, identity, and what it truly means to build a juster society. Professor Yamini, welcome to Business Talk. We are so glad you are here.
Thank you so much, Deepak, for such a generous introduction. It was so generous. And thank you also for offering your platform up to one of the most sort of invisibilized actors, animals, right? Like, I mean, we never think about animals, even though they're so ubiquitous in our worlds. So thank you so much for offering up your platform to shine some light into the politics of, animal worlds.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, India is simultaneously one of the world's largest beef and leather exporters and a country where cow slaughter can attract life imprisonment in several states. How did you first encounter this contradiction, and what compelled you to investigate it so deeply?
Thank you, Deepak. So, India is one of the largest producers of leather. It's one of the largest producers of beef, but it's also critically one of the largest producers of dairy. And India has been consistently the largest producer of dairy since 1997. This position has been stable. It has never actually not been the largest leading producer of dairy in the world, right? Even its beef production, its leading position has gone up and down. Leather production has gone up and down. Dairy has remained consistent, right? And when we talk about, and the focus is always on India's beef exports, right? Because beef is a very, very political commodity in India. However, beef is not the only product that is sourced from the body of a cow or a buffalo. It's one amongst many products. And in India, cows and buffaloes are only bred for milk. We don't actually. So if you look at other dairy countries, other leading dairy as well as beef countries, let's say Australia, let's say Argentina, Brazil, United States, they have specific breeds specifically for dairy and breeds specifically for beef. You have the Angus cows who are big beef breeders, bred for beef. In India, all of our breeds are for dairy only. We don't actually even have cows and buffaloes, bred for beef, right? The cows that are bred for beef are actually very different to the cows that are bred for dairy. The dairy breeds are high lactating breeds because the milk is the main product that is to be sourced from them. The breeds that are bred for beef, typically in these beef production countries, are double muscled, for example. They have excessive muscle. They're bred to have extra muscles, extra layer of muscle, extra layer of tissue. So these are not associated normally with dairy breed cows, right? So we don't actually really export so we do rate very high in beef exports and leather exports, but the attention that we sort of need to bring back is the one that receives the product that receives the least attention, which is dairy. Um, and we don't think about dairy and its stakes and its implications, and definitely dairy is nowhere politicized in India the way beef is, right? I mean, dairy is, or if it is politicized, it's in very, very celebratory ways. It's a sacred product. It's part of Panchagavya, so it's always celebrated it's celebrated in a political way, if at all it is politicized. Otherwise, it is actually it's only beef that gets the political attention. So, but the reality is that dairy also is a product which is associated with slaughter. So the reason why beef becomes a political product and highly politicized product is because beef is, of course, immediately associated with cow slaughter, because those are certain products you get when the animal is only dead. But certain products you only get when the animal is alive, right? And all dairy producing countries in the world, leading dairy producing countries, whether it is Australia, whether it is Europe, whether it is United States, it's very clear that the dairy production continuum starts with the breeding of the cows and then pregnancies, lactation, and then eventually, when the animal is no longer able to produce milk, off to the slaughterhouse. In India, that continuum is invisibilized. So what happens is that it appears as though the continuum is broken. They don't necessarily go from dairy farm. They just sort of, apparently get routed into gaushalas or abandoned or whatever. But what happens is that the slaughter segment of dairy production, because dairy production does have a slaughter segment, that simply goes underground in India, because that is criminalized in India. So my interest in this really came about because I wanted to understand, how are these two contradictions possible to coexist in such a palpable and visible way? Because when we talk about India's high beef exports, the common answer normally is that, mostly they come from buffalo beef, which is true, and which doesn't make it any more ethical, because, I mean, if you're looking at it strictly from an ethical animal ethics perspective, then of course the buffalo is as important as the cow. There's no real difference between either of them. So it is true that most of the exports per se do go overseas, because we have export licensing laws and they're generally being tested. There's oftentimes the meat is tested, though of course there's no doubt a lot of cow beef that also makes it overseas, Indian cow beef. But we also have a huge amount, but it wasn't the full story. It is never the full story, because what happens to the cows who are, because we breed, I mean, India's cattle herd is about 300 million. Where do they all go? Right. So I was really curious about what actually happens, because if you're looking at it purely from an economic perspective, a body of a bovine has huge financial stakes, whether for milk, whether for gelatin, whether for bones. It's not very commonly known, for example, that sugar is often mixed with bone char, right? So, and pharmaceuticals, there's a lot of products that are extracted from bovine bodies for pharmaceuticals, for leather, for a whole spectrum of goods. So as an economic commodity, um, it really has to be financially viable to keep producing and breeding cows. Okay, so no matter what the religious perspectives or the political perspectives, economically, the cow is still a commodity. So it has to be economically viable. And a cow attains its full economic value only after slaughter because the bones, the meat, the leather, all the gelatin, all of that needs to be extracted from cows as well. That's when the full economic potential of the cow is reached. But these stories are never really known, told, discussed, etc., because we just tend to politicize one or two products instead of the whole totality of products that we get from these animals.
Professor, most political analysis treats cows as a symbols or objects of debate, flags in a cultural war. You deliberately reframe them as subjects with lived experiences.
Yeah.
Why is that shift in perspective so important? And what does it change about how we understand India's cow protection politics?
I was really interested in the terminology cow protection. What does the cow protect? What does cow protection actually do for the cows? If we were to actually, what is the idea of protection actually doing? What is it protecting? Cow protection seems to imply that the protection is for the cows. Okay. And what does that typically mean? That typically means an anti-slaughter law. So cows are prohibited from slaughter. But then if you think about it, the cow is experiencing violence from birth to death. Like uh, very visibly, of course, we can see cows eating plastics on the road. That doesn't seem to be a form of protection. There seems to be no protection from that type of violence. It's in fact normalized. These are slow violences. These are unspectacular violences. We see them every day. It's normalized. It almost feels like plastic is something that cows must eat. Right? Like that's almost like a normal food in India, right? We rarely understand that cows have four chambers. In the four stomach chambers, the food has to pass through four chambers in order to be fully digested. If you're putting plastic and polythene bags through these chambers, most of the time it gets blocked, right? And the cow is in agony because a four-chambered, four-stomached animal, having all these sorts of inedibles and toxic plastics and toxic materials, inedible materials. We don't even think of that. The foundational trauma of dairying itself, we don't think of that as a violence, right? And how is the cow getting any protection from that? Um, Dairying, for example, relies on the separation of the mother and the child. And any mammal, and cow is a mammal, humans are mammals, cats are mammals. There's a ferocious attachment to the calf. The calf when we talk about the idea of, no, we must protect the cow is our mother. The cow hasn't consented to be our mother. It's a forced relationship that humans have imposed on the cows. And one of the things that I would really want for my work to achieve is to sort of break the idea of cow as a mother, as a mother of humans, because what is completely obscure is that the cow is really the mother of a biological infant. Okay, that's the only baby that she really wants to be a mother of, right? If you look at the separation of a cow and a calf, and you look at the trauma and the terror and the fear of both of them, and so too for the buffalo, so too for the camel. Camel is also a dairying animal. I've seen these same traumas replay over and over again when it comes to camel mothers and camel calves as well. When it comes to goat mothers and goat calves, when it comes to sheep mothers and sheep calves. These industries rely on separating the mother and child, right? You put a cow through a pregnancy of 9 months, and then instantly when the cow delivers, the calf is taken away. If it's a female calf, recycled back into dairying. If it's a male calf, off to the slaughterhouse, because a male calf is useless for the dairy industry. And dairy is the main industry that we have. We don't even talk about the fact that India has a thriving veal industry, an underground veal industry. We politicize beef, but we don't politicize veal. Okay, veal usually comes from dead male calves because that is almost too emotive. And also what veal does, veal reveals something that beef doesn't. Beef, it's about, you can think about an adult cow being killed off or slaughtered. Veal, the product veal reveals an infant. It is too close to the dairy industry. The minute you start talking about the veal and you start probing a little bit, you understand, oh my God, it's the male calf that's been taken away from the mother who's still in the dairy industry. So therefore, we don't even talk about veal in India, but we have a thriving, huge, massive veal industry in India. We never talk about it. We only talk about beef. Veal is the product which is so silenced in India, right? Because it would be almost too quick in immediately revealing the realities of the dairy industry. So I was really interested in what is the cow getting a protection from? What is being protected? The cow is clearly not being protected. So what is being protected? What is being protected is the ideology, the idea there's a particular work that the idea of cow as mother is doing. It's a very, very it's an idea that is loaded in with inflections of caste and religion. Okay, so the cow is not just unambiguously our mother. The cow is implicitly the mother of Hindus. That makes the cow herself a Hindu animal, right? The idea of an animal having a religion is a startling one, but that's exactly what happens, right? So the cow is a mother of Hindus. The cow is a Hindu herself, and the cow actually is a stand-in for the idea of a Hindu nation. Okay, so what we are protecting when we are protecting cows is you're protecting an idea of a Hindu nation. So the mother cow is really a stand-in for a Hindu Mother India. And that's one of the links that my book's trying to show. So when you're talking about, Muslims or Dalits attacking, butchering the cow, it's like an attack on the idea of the Hindu nation. It's not an attack on the animal per se, because if you were really interested in protecting the animal, if cow was to be protected as a cow, then the first thing that we'd be halting is the dairy industry. But the cow is not being protected as a cow. The cow is being protected as a carrier for the idea of a Hindu of a Hindu Mother India. Mother cow is Mother India, right? That is the implicit sort of political connection. So I was really interested in, when I was starting to dig up what is clearly, if the cow is not being protected, then what is being protected? And that basically took me on this long journey of trying to understand when people talk about protecting cows, what are they really protecting? They're protecting an idea. They're protecting an idea of nationalism. They're protecting an idea of who belongs to this state and who doesn't belong to this state. And the cow is almost a boundary marker. The cow acts as a border, right, about who belongs and who doesn't. And there's a particular type of relationship. So Muslims have a particular type of relationship with the cow, which is all about butchering. The Hindus have a particular type of relationship with the cow, which is all about worshipping. But this obscures the foundational reality of the cow as experiencing violence no matter what. It's plainly at human hands. It doesn't matter if it's Hindu hands or Muslim hands or some other hands, right? It's purely at human hands as a dairy commodity.
Professor, you argue that the Hindu framing of the cow as mother is actually a relationship of domination, where bovine motherhood is simultaneously commercialized for dairy and weaponized politically. Can you unpack that paradox for our listeners? How can something framed as a scared also be a site of such violence?
So the idea of the cow as a mother is a highly sentimental one. Outside looking in, it looks like it looks like an affirmative, positive relationship because you love your mother, you respect your mother, you care for your mother, you want to protect your mother, you want to serve your mother, right? It's very common to hear words like Gau Seva. Okay, because we are doing seva for the animals, we're doing seva for the mother, basically. So the idea of the cow as a mother is one that you cannot immediately argue with until you start probing it further. Okay, it's a non-consensual relationship. The cow also needs to agree to be our mother. The cow will never agree to be our mother, given what it involves: separation from her own child, diversion and siphoning off of her own milk. She's never going to agree to that. It's not a mutually consensual relationship. Um, and 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 the idea of here, the self-sacrificing mother, the giving mother, the mother that wants to give, these are actually incredibly harmful and dangerous ideas. And feminists have critiqued it even in the human realm because this becomes a great way of exploiting women. right? So feminists have talked about this at length in even within purely the human realm about the idea of women as self-sacrificing, as mothers, as patient, as endlessly patient, will take any type of abuse and will take any type of violence for the sake of her child. These are ideas which are become very open to exploitation under capitalism, under commodification. Once there is a sort of like economic stakes in exploiting this imagery or the body or the idea of the mother, then it's an extremely violent one, right? So, and in this particular case, the idea of the cow as a mother is very it's gaslighting in the sense that if a being is your mother, then your first right is to her breast milk, right? That's basically what this relationship is sanctioning. Okay, so and if humans were to have it, then the calf cannot. Her actual baby cannot. Her actual biological child that she has carried in her womb for 9 months or 10 months is either going to be immediately killed and siphoned off to the veal market, or starved and bottle fed and watery bottle feeding, and then raised, recycled back into the dairy industry. So the idea of the cow as a mother of humans is an extremely destructive, violent, and harmful for the cow. Right? When we talk about sexual relationships, I think we have come to a point in human society where we understand that it has to be consensual. It has to be mutually consenting. Any type of a relationship has to be consenting, right? There is no consent here. The maternal relationship is the same. The idea of consent in a maternal relationship does not normally come into question because, a mother typically, in a very normative sort of sense, a mother gives birth and, the child is obviously hers. There's no question of consenting. But in this particular situation, you have a forced relationship, and that forced relationship is founded upon extraction. Let's say, fine, cow's my mother. I don't want milk though. I'm not interested in her milk. I'm just happy for her to be my mother. That would be not of interest to most people, because they would see that as shallow. Because what deepens this relationship is the fact that I can access her milk.
Professor, based on your ethnographic fieldwork across India, what do cows, buffaloes, bulls, and calves actually experience inside the dairy production system? What did you witness that most people, even those who consume dairy daily, are completely unaware of?
It's a great question. It's an interesting, and in so many ways this is a difficult question to answer, because there is a spectacular violence which is normalized, that the cow's calf is taken away. And in fact, this is not something that many people even know. In fact, even I didn't know that. 20 years ago, I didn't really understand this either. Though, if we think about it even for 1 or 2 minutes, like if we actually were to think about it, we were like, all right, if we are getting the milk, then someone is not, so the baby is not. It would be logical. But we don't firstly go there. And secondly, if we did, we are like, because milk is such a common product, we just sort of normalize it. But the kind of violences that animals experience, it is almost impossible to convey. I think one of the things that really stands out for me is the very normalized violence of cows constantly being tied, calves constantly being tied, bulls constantly being tied, often on very, very short ropes, right? The tied cow is just a normal figure in India. I mean, when they're tied like this by their neck, right, to a stake, and you have a big back, and you can imagine, I don't even want to think about the kind of back pain and neck pain and shoulder pain that cows must be experiencing, not to mention the boredom, not to mention the insanity, not to mention when your basic needs for movement, for wandering, for freedom, like a living being has an inborn impulse, yearning, longing for freedom. And when they're 24/7 tied, pretty much. I mean, so and when you go to, or for example, the other kinds of violences that are rarely known is the violence that bulls experience for the dairy industry. So there's, bovine semen farming is one of the most unknown facets of the industry. So where bulls, cow bulls as well as buffalo bulls, are ejaculated once or twice a day the breeds that are considered high or elite bulls, right? Elite bulls of both species, because it's basically the bull semen that determines both the sex of the infant, but also the quality, so to speak. And the quality in this case means high lactating cows, right? So they always want to mate. The dairy industry wants to mate cows with elite bulls. Like, the quality of the mother doesn't matter so much. The genetic quality of the mother doesn't matter, but the genetic quality of the father does. And so these bulls are bred specifically for the bovine semen industry. If they are deemed of low quality, off they go to the slaughterhouse. They are not required. But if they are deemed sufficiently of high quality, then they experience this kind of mind-numbing insanity of boredom, of the only movement that they are allowed is they're taken once or twice a day to the ejaculation center, ejaculated, and then brought back. And that's it. And these animals are so badly socialized that it's very difficult to put these bulls in a gaushala, for example, because they are so aggressive, having always been solitary animals. They just don't know how to bond and interact with their own herd, right? They just have no way of doing it. So in fact, in the 10 years of my research, there was one bull that I saw in a Pinjra pole in Ahmedabad somewhere, and that was the only bull that I'd seen rehabilitated, so to speak, from the bovine semen industry. And even then, he was isolated. He was standing apart, but it seemed like he was an extremely docile bull, and he was an exception. But most of these bulls just get quietly siphoned off to slaughterhouses. And again, one of those really unknown violences, like buffaloes going absolutely crazy, with just boredom. And I think that's one of the unknown, unseen, unrecognized, underappreciated aspects of violence is the suffering of the caged animal when your entire life is tied up. And periodically, you are untied either to give milk or to give semen, but otherwise, your life is one of mind-numbing insanity, right? That boredom of the caged animal, something that we don't sufficiently recognize. But this is really, really the tip of the iceberg. I mean, farming, delivery, a dairy farm, it's a maternity ward. What is it? A dairy farm is nothing but a maternity ward. There are newly delivered mothers there all the time, newborn infants there all the time, right? A dairy farm is actually, think of it as a hospital maternity ward, okay? But without the kind of medical care that's available in a hospital. So 50% of the deaths in a dairy farm come from maternal mortality. They come because of delivery, because the calf gets stuck, or the mother is too weak after years and years of delivery, too weak to push. It's a very common phenomenon called dystocia, which basically means that the mother is unable to push, and basically the calf and the mother both die. It's very common in dairy farms. It's a maternity ward without the medical facilities. That's what a dairy farm is. So these are the kind of violences that are rarely known, rarely understood, but really must be understood as violence and must be appreciated as violence. Because the only violence we think of is slaughter. But their entire life is a continuous experience of suffering at so many levels.
Professor, you reveal how India's dairy production continuum depends on the exploitation of diverse, racialized labor to obscure the violence within it. Who are these workers? And how does their marginalized serve to keep the realities of the industry hidden from public view?
That's an excellent question. So in any country, whether even if you look at Australia or the United States, the workers of a slaughterhouse, the blue-collar workers of a slaughterhouse are of the poorest communities of those countries. Oftentimes, they're even illegal, undocumented workers. Okay, so for example, in the United States, there might be Mexicans. In Australia, they would be also, similarly of highly marginalized, highly invisibilized, exploitable. So therefore, they're exploitable, right? Nobody wants to work in a slaughterhouse. It is difficult work. It's psychologically, physically difficult work. Nobody has an ambition, really. The slaughterhouse is a place where you go to work because of absolute lack of choices in life. And if you have no choices in life, it means you're extremely vulnerable, right? In society, you're very vulnerable. And that is the case in general across globally. In India, it is no different. Who are the poorest in India? The poorest in India are the Dalits and the Muslims. So the Sachar Commission report, spoke at length about the deeply entrenched and chronic poverty that is prevalent in many, many Muslim communities, right? So what are the poorest going to naturally do is to undertake not just dirty or difficult labor. In India, this is risky labor. This is actually life-threatening labor. Why is this life-threatening labor? As I explained before, in every other country, the dairy production continuum starts from birth, and then then through pregnancy, then through repeated pregnancies, lactation, and eventually this continuum moves onwards towards the slaughterhouse. There is no question. Nobody is arguing about that. This is all very clear. This is pure dairy economics. Once a product is no longer productive, you're going to dispose it off. It makes business sense. It does not make any business sense to maintain an unproductive product, right? And this is generally accepted as dairy economics everywhere, except India. In India, because of this sort of political burden that the cow additionally carries, in addition to the economic burden, we cannot accept openly or publicly that the mother is going to now be slaughtered because the mother is now useless, right? That is not a narrative that we can actually take forward. So in India alone, suddenly supposedly there's a disruption in the dairy production continuum, which is an economic continuum. It's got nothing to do with religion. It's got nothing to do with sentimentality. Pure, cold economics. In India alone, though, the narrative presents as though suddenly, after the dairy farm, there's a disruption, and the cow apparently goes to gaushalas, or cow is apparently on the road, or we don't know what happens to the cows, presumably somewhere alive. That is not true. What happens is that the only difference is in India also, the continuum is actually maintained. Okay? The cows and buffaloes do go on towards slaughterhouses, except that this part of the continuum goes underground. It goes underground. Now, because it goes underground because it is illegal in most states in India. If you go to West Bengal or in Kerala, then these are some of the exceptions. But most states in India, would cow slaughter is an illegal act. So it goes underground. Now, if you were to perform labor underground, you're not just poor, you're extremely poor and vulnerable. Because you're not just performing difficult and dirty labor here. You're actually performing risky labor. And we have seen that, right? Since 2014, it's become very public about, the beef lynchings, as they're called, the cow lynchings, they call, where Muslims and Dalits are quite literally lynched to death, and there's a huge and other forms of violence that is inflicted upon them for undertaking this type of labor, right? But what we don't understand is that if they are actually just merely performing the dairy production continuum. The dairy production continuum, though, is legal for some aspects of it, where Hindus, Muslims, and everyone together are consuming, but then suddenly the production continuum becomes illegal. Now, the reality is this. If you are making one segment of the production continuum illegal, implicitly the entire production continuum is illegal. If it is illegal to slaughter cows in India, but then dairying demands it, implicitly Indian dairying itself is illegal. Indian dairying itself is illegal. But what we do is play this narrative game of just segmenting certain types as political and certain types of production, certain segments of the production as not. Right? So which allows us to consume dairy and have that consumption framed and understood as a legal part, but then the rest of the production continuum is illegal. But then again, only some people are now going to be implicated in that, and they will, again, as happens in every country, they will be the most vulnerable, socially marginalized, socially deprived, and therefore undertaking this kind of risky labor. Like when you talk to the butchers, and nobody really wants to do this, even though they have been doing it intergenerationally, but in increasingly it is becoming so risky. They're not, if day-to-day labor is going to be profuse with risks of lynching and beating and rape and killing, one's not necessarily going to do this for ambition. One's doing it because it's survival. So this is where we actually exploit our racialized labor, but then they're framed as, they're framed as external to the Hindu nation. They're framed as anti-national. They're framed as, violating the Gau Mata. Well, so why Gau Mata is being violated from birth? The Gau Mata is being violated the minute she became Mata. That's not something that is very clear though, and I'm hoping that it will become so, as we discuss these ideas more.
Professor, your book shows how the mother cow ideology is weaponized by right-wing Hindu nationalists to violently target Muslims and Dalits. How did cow protectionism become such a powerful instrument for communal and caste-based violence? And who benefits from keeping that connection obscured?
Cow protectionism is about a 200-year-old movement at this point, and it started under colonial India, where, the idea was that at some point, of course, the British were going to leave and India was going to become free, but then what would that free country look like? Well, because of ideas of India being secular, there were ideas of India being a Hindu country. So what would this free nation look like, right? And cow protectionism was born in the colonial era movement as a way of sort of reinforcing the idea of the Hindu nation as a caring, nurturing, mothering nation. But then also, as I said, more than any other animal, the cow provides a border as well. A nation needs a border. Okay, otherwise it's not a nation. There's no such thing as a borderless nation. And in our very, very multi-diverse country, if you were to not have a multi-diverse secular country, and if you wanted to have a country based on a religion or based on a particular type of ethnicity, then you need borders. And the borders are symbolic, borders are physical, but symbolic borders are really important. And the cow it's easy to use the idea of the cow as a bordering mechanism, because the cow features amply in Hindu scriptures. But it's not just the cow. If you look at the Hindu scriptures is multi-species, starting from rats. Animals feature in Hindu scriptures, right? Monkeys and rats. But then the cow is much more amenable, so to speak, in operating as a bordering mechanism. So the idea of the cow as a mother benefits those who want to sort of reimagine India as a Hindu nation, because that kind of nostalgia and dream, I think, has always been alive. Even once India became secular, that idea that India should be Hindu has always been alive. And there have been very many ways of trying to sort of reinforce this idea through sentiment, through symbolism. And the cow simply is one highly emotive way. It's actually a really successful political symbol in that respect.
Professor, while the cow receives enormous political and religious attention in India, the buffalo, equally central to dairy and beef production, remains largely invisible in public discourse. What is the buffalo story, and why does that invisibility matter?
The buffalo, as a dark-skinned animal, slower, lumbering animal, is the antithesis of the white cow goddess. Symbolically, they couldn't be more poles apart. The buffalo is a demon, right? In our scriptures, the buffalo comes with all these sorts of qualities and attributes that are opposite to the cow. But the buffalo is also an animal that is really associated with Dalits as much as the cow is with the Brahmins. So these animal bodies carry caste in them. It's not just human bodies that carry caste in them, animal bodies carry caste in them. And it's again not just the cows and buffaloes, by the way. A whole spectrum of animals carry caste in them. And this is an imposition, because obviously they're not genetically or zoologically caste-based entities. But this is not just identity politics, but identification politics, where we identify with a particular species by imposing a particular type of identity on them. So pigs are also, like low caste, right? Pigs are low caste. The Dalits breed the pigs. So these are dirty animals that are associated with them, and the buffaloes kind of symbolize a similar type of a polarizing caste politics. So on the bodies of the buffaloes and cows, even though they're used in identical ways, a polarizing caste politics plays out. So the buffalo really does as important work as the cow does, not just in terms of economic labor, but also in political labor. And the fact is that if we think about this our so-called love for the mother cow doing a particular type of work because we love the mother, so how can we possibly violate her? But if we love the mother, we have a right to her milk. So the so-called love for the mother is doing a particular type of work in allowing us to access milk and exploit the cow. The contempt we have for the buffalo also does a similar type of work. Because if a being is contemptible, they don't even merit consideration. You can do what you want with them. They don't deserve it. They don't deserve consideration. So as much as the cow so-called deserves consideration and deserves reverence, the buffalo doesn't even deserve that. Like buffalo is contemptible. But whether you are reverencing at that level or showing contempt at that level, it's actually achieving the same end result. They're both exploitable. They both do the work of making a being exploitable.
Professor, you introduced the idea of a multi-species democratic politics, one where the unraveling of human domination over farm animals is integral to broader progressive struggles. For listeners unfamiliar with this concept, what does multi-species democracy actually look like in practice?
That's a really good question, and one that is possibly best answered by political theorists. In fact, Will Kimlicka and Sue Donaldson, who are based in Queen's University in Canada, someone that you might want to interview, they have just brought out a book called Animals' Right to Politics. How do animals actually get engaged, represented, their voices heard in a democratic political arena where it is already difficult to do that for diverse groups of humans, right? So how do we actually achieve that for animals has been strongly debated and discussed, and then a lot of the times it just gets put aside because it's again a small niche of people who are involved in unpacking this kind of debate. And I think, and then the other question comes about how will we represent this multi-diverse community of animals? Like, again, some animals could be represented more than some other animals. So these are very, very tricky and complicated questions. I think, though, that the idea of how this would look like in practice must be preceded with the acceptance and with the recognition that before we get to the idea of how do we put this in practice, I think this must really first come with a very sound understanding and recognition of the fact that animals are political actors and they do have a right to politics. They actually are not to be disregarded in politics. You don't speak for them in politics. How do we, so there must be, these ideas must really percolate into human minds as individual citizens, but also into political institutions. Right? Right now, the way animals feature in politics and animals do feature in politics is like, it's a matter of, let's say, trade, diplomacy. Okay, so animals are traded as diplomatic symbols. Like if soft power, Australia will send kangaroos to a friendly country, and Australia will send koalas to a friendly country. India may send tigers to a friendly country. India may get cheetahs from Africa as a symbol of some type of political alignment and political negotiation. So animals do feature in politics, but currently they're used. So the idea that they are not to be used, but to be actually engaged, I think we really need to sit with that, and this is not a radical thing in the sense that this has already happened for humans. Women did not have rights. Women did not have recognition in political arenas for a long time. Indigenous people did not have political rights or recognition. So we have already been through this in the case of humans, and it has been tough and complex in the case of humans. It's going to be tougher and a little bit more complex, but also it doesn't necessarily have to be. I think the complexity comes from the fact that comes from two things. One, we think animals are not political bodies, but this is closely interlinked with the idea that we think humans are not animals, even though zoologically we are, biologically we are. No scientists will argue with that. Humans are animals. But when we say animals cannot be in politics or animals cannot have political rights, we are disregarding the fact that we are also animals. But then we do have political rights. So I think the we really need to get used to the idea that animals are political beings, political actors, and we just really must sit with this, accept them. In order to do that, we actually need to know what animals go through. Because we see a cow, she's sort of like, quietly walking along the road. And we think, oh, she's not even, there's nothing here for me to take seriously here. We really need to get intimately acquainted with the realities of their lives. And it's not just farmed animals, it's the lives of animals. Like, what are human lives? What are we doing to them? We really need to know this. We really need to understand this. And that is our responsibility. I think the idea that animals are regarded as political, that responsibility rests first with us really knowing about the realities of their lives.
Professor, you speculate on the real possibility of a post-dairy society grounded in vegan agricultural policies for livelihoods and food security. In a country where dairy is so deeply woven into culture, economy, and identity, is this genuinely achievable, and where would the transition begin?
So the idea, as you're correct, that currently dairy is interwoven into every aspect of edible life in India, so to speak, right? But this was not the case. This was not always the case. In fact, pre-1950s, India was not significantly a dairy consuming country whatsoever. The dairy was not a common part of there were some cultures and some states in India which did have high dairy consumption, but that was absolutely not across the board, right? When Verghese Kurian took over as the chairman of the National Dairy Board in the 1950s, his idea was to simply give farmers a livelihood. Dairy was an economic decision in India. It was not a cultural decision. And it's a modern decision. It's not that long ago. It was only about, 60 years ago. It's within the lifetimes of our parents and grandparents, right? It's not that long ago. So this was an economic decision. This was not a cultural decision that dairy must be interwoven with every aspect of Indian life. It was an economic decision because post independence, there was high poverty, and he saw this as a way of trying to provide livelihoods. Okay, so. And of course, that his memoir is actually quite an interesting revelation about the kind of work that he had to put in. This wasn't achieved overnight. He had to put in a lot of work, and to make dairy an economically viable livelihood. That level of intention and effort and work can still come. It is not impossible, right? But it's not just about, I mean, if we look at if we and it's also a question of like really understanding some of our own scriptural history. So that ocean of milk, the mythology around the ocean of milk, the serpent is like churning the waters and it becomes, the ocean waters become milk. Now, if you were to really look at the verses, they talk about the churning of the milk coming from a mixing of the herbs and the water. The herbs, the medicinal herbs, the sacred herbs of the hills and water. So the original mythology, the Hindu mythology of churning of the ocean, the milk, the ocean of milk was actually vegan milk. It was made of herbs, medicinal herbs and sacred herbs and water. It was vegan. It was not dairy milk, right? So we actually really need to revisit and actually scrutinize some of our own mythologies, but we also need to put political will and put political effort into it and look at alternative livelihoods that can actually really replace some of what dairy farmers are. There's a way of funneling and channeling some of this labor. For example, cashew farmers, it's very common to make cashew milk, right? Cashew farmers are some of the most impoverished in India, to the extent that cashew farmers, it's almost dead bondage. the face of modern slavery. And it uses child labor. These conditions could be radically improved if we were to really channel money and attention into cashew farming, for example. Really clean up this industry. Jackfruit farming in Kerala, for example. Much of the jackfruit would just get wasted, like tons and tons and tons of jackfruit. Now, the vegan industry in the West, uses jackfruit as replacement pork, and it's now suddenly possible for big exports of jackfruit to sort of enhance livelihoods in those ways. But it's not just about replacing products. Our food system per se is broken. Our food system per se, including the plant-based food system, is broken. Like we are so reliant on fertilizers. We are so reliant on chemical inputs into land, because our land is so degraded. Our land is so polluted. There's no way of actually producing clean food per se on our land, on our soil, without a huge multidimensional effort to clean it up. Right? So we have to actually start with the point that Indian food per se, the Indian food production system per se is broken and needs to be fixed. We also need to start taking pride in regional food, right? Like, regional cuisine. If you were to really dig down into regional cuisine, what are the kinds of plants that can actually survive this era of climate change? Because what are the kinds of indigenous-based farming, indigenous plant farming, indigenous breeds of rice? We have lost our breeds of rice because all we have is the long basmati, and we just have 2, 3 varieties of rice. But every part of the country should be having its own indigenous varieties of potatoes and rice and different types of vegetables, mushrooms. What can we actually do to it's because it's two things. One is about reviving indigenous geographies of food, but the other one is also about what is possible in an era of climate change and how can we make the best of what we have, right? So the cultural and the political interweaving is real, but I think it's needs to be sort of picked at slowly, because even like patriarchy, we are far from realizing the dream of having an anti-patriarchal society, of having a gender equal society. We are very far from having those dreams. We are very far from realizing those dreams. But but it's clear in the public view that that's what we should be aspiring towards. No one is really contesting that, at least in a progressive space. We need to at least get there with reference to animal rights and vegan farming as well. We need to at least get there, saying that, we don't really have a right to their bodies. We don't really have a right to their, at the very least, the body must be the sole possession of the one whose body it is, right? So I think we just need to come to a point where these ideas at least become common in the public space. So as far as realizing the perfect society goes, we haven't realized that for any dimension of human life either. But that doesn't mean that we don't think it's important or that we stop trying. So I think, getting to that point would be important and a really significant achievement.
Professor Yamini, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. You gather this material through intensive ethnographic and empirical fieldwork across India, inside farms, slaughterhouses, and communities. What was the most difficult thing you witnessed or learned during this research? And how has it changed the way you live and think?
As I said, there's so much suffering across the entire continuum. It's difficult to pick some, but if I were to think about the most common types of examples, 2 types of examples really come to me, and it doesn't matter if it's in a dairy farm or it's in a gaushala. It's the confusion of the calves. That really sits with me. Especially the calf is orphaned, which is always the case most of the time. Even in a gaushala, sometimes, if there's a male calf that someone has picked up and brought to a gaushala, the confusion of the calf, because without mom, the baby is confused and scared, right? The confusion in their eyes, they're just looking for mom, or looking for mother substitute. So the confusion and the fear and the terror of a calf, because the world means nothing if the mother's body is not close by. And the mother's body is never close by for these calves. So I think that sort of repeated confusion and their fear always strikes me. And then the other thing that really strikes me is the anger of cows. And anger of some, like, again, they're all individuals like us, so some of them, they all have different personalities. It's incredible. They all have different personalities. But the anger of the cows who are really demonstrating that anger also really stands out with me. I was outside the Mahalakshmi temple in Mumbai once, and there was a woman having 3, 4 cows, and she was sort of, using them as donations, and she was trying to make money that way. But one of the cows was aggressive. When I say aggressive, that's such a bad word. One of the cows was just a little bit agitated because all she wanted to do was get to the calf. She was, milk was leaking out of her udder, so she was really desperate for her calf. And to control her more, the woman had tied her by the neck, almost touching the ground. So she couldn't even raise her head. And this was right in front of the mandir, right in front of God. And 1 or 2 people came and said, "Why are you trying the cow, so tight?" And she was, she would just make up some excuse, and she continued doing it. She didn't really loosen the cow because she was trying to control the cow. And that anger really stands out. The desperation, the ferocity, and then just being contained so tight. And something similar happened in a gaushala, where even in a gaushala, the cows and calves are separated. Why? Because even in a gaushala, they're milking. So, because dairy is not seen as violent, even in a gaushala, right? Because cow protection does not include dairy, which is rather the foundation of where protection should start. So the cows and calves were penned off, and I, had permission from the gaushala manager, and he said you can go into the calves area. So I opened the gate, and as soon as I opened the gate, a cow came charging. I mean, she couldn't get to me because she was herself penned off. But I was like, oh my God, I don't have her permission to go to where her baby is. And I immediately just, locked the gate back and stepped away because she was so agitated that someone's going into the pen where her baby is. Right? So I think the anger of the cows also really stood out to me. And the anger of the buffaloes as well. They also, so angry mothers, I think, angry protective mothers who are really protecting the babies that they want to protect, their actual babies. That really stood out to me as well.
Listeners, Mother Cow, Mother India is not just a book. It is an invitation to think differently about power, politics, and who belongs in our moral universe. Professor Yamini, thank you for bringing that invitation to our business talk. We hope our listeners carry these questions with them long after this episode ends. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, Deepak. It was such a pleasure talking to you. And thank you for such thoughtful questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.